I'm Leo Vance, and at 33 I call Denver, Colorado my home. I run my own tech company, a startup that I built from the ground up. We create innovative software that helps large commercial buildings manage their energy consumption more efficiently. It's a demanding venture, one that has taken every ounce of my focus and resolve to get off the ground. To an outsider, my life probably looks like the picture of success. A confident entrepreneur at the helm of a growing business, the kind of life people aspire to. But that polished surface hides a history that is anything but simple. It's a story that starts in what felt like a sunlit childhood, before it takes a sharp turn into shadow. A place where I was forced to learn that the word family doesn't always mean safety. My life began without a history. I was an orphan. I have no face or name to attach to my biological parents. Just the cold fact that they left me at a children's home on the edge of Houston. Then, when I was 3 years old, a couple named David and Clara Miller came into my life and adopted me. They had a lovely home in a quiet suburb of San Antonio, the kind with a neat white fence and a yard overflowing with bright yellow daisies. I was only a toddler when I first walked through their front door. Too little to grasp the concept of a real family, but I could feel the warmth of the place instantly. It settled over me like a blanket. Clara, the woman who became my mother, had a smile that felt as gentle and bright as the spring sun. She would pull me close, her voice soft as she sang me to sleep or told me whimsical stories about clever rabbits outsmarting foxes in the woods. David, my adoptive father, was a towering figure with a serious expression from his long days at the bank, yet he never failed to toss a basketball with me in the driveway when he got home. I started calling them Mom and Dad, and from a child's trusting perspective, it was simple. I was theirs and they loved me. There was no reason to think otherwise. Those first years felt like living inside a soft, pastel-colored dream. I can still conjure the feeling of those Sunday mornings, the whole house filled with the scent of warm butter and sugar from the cookies Clara baked at the kitchen table. I'd sit beside her, my brow wrinkled in focus as David patiently guided my clumsy fingers, teaching me the loops and pulls of tying my own shoelaces. My favorite place in the world was the backyard, home to a sturdy wooden swing that David had built just for me. "You're going to soar like an eagle, Leo," he would shout with a laugh, pushing me so high my stomach would flutter. From the peak of each arc, I could see Clara waving from the back porch, her smile making me feel secure and loved. In those sun-drenched moments, my world felt unshakable. I had everything a boy could ever want, a home, a family, and the profound certainty that I belonged. I truly believed I was the happiest kid alive, and then in an instant it all fractured. The year I turned 6, Clara gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl we named Noah and Sophie. I vividly remember standing in the polished hospital corridor, my hand tightly gripping the string of a yellow balloon David had bought me. A thrill ran through me. I was going to be a big brother. I imagined all the things I would teach them, how to send a soccer ball flying into a net, or the secret to drawing the perfectly lopsided cats I was so proud of. But when Clara and David brought Noah and Sophie home, the atmosphere changed. Clara's gaze, once so full of warmth for me, now seemed to look straight through me. That special smile, the one I thought was mine, was now aimed only at the 2 infants sleeping in their cribs. David was the same. He was completely consumed by the needs of the twins, and our basketball games in the driveway simply vanished. The ball sat by the door, gathering dust. I began to feel like a shadow moving through the rooms of the house that had once been my sanctuary. At first, I tried to reason it away. "Of course they're busy," my 6-year-old mind insisted. 2 new babies are a lot of work. They just need more time for them. I decided the best thing to do was to make myself useful, to earn back my place. I tried to help in any way I could, mopping the kitchen floor, folding the tiny piles of baby clothes, and even softly singing the lullabies Clara used to sing to me when the twins cried and she looked exhausted. I just wanted her to notice me again. But my efforts to bridge the growing distance were always met with a chilling reception, her words landing like tiny shards of ice. I remember one afternoon I was gently trying to show Noah how his small fist could hold a spoon. Clara saw me from across the room and swooped in, snatching the spoon from my grasp so abruptly it clattered against his high chair tray. "Leo, leave your brother alone," she said, her voice completely devoid of warmth, as if I were a stranger who had wandered in off the street. "I don't need you doing that." I just stood there, my own hands starting to shake, a hot flush of confusion and shame creeping up my neck. What had I done that was so wrong? Over the next few years, the disparity became impossible to ignore. Noah and Sophie were showered with new clothes and shiny toys, while I was left with their father's old shirts, the shoulders threadbare and smelling of someone else. When I worked up the courage to ask David if he could take me and my friends to the movies, he cut me off with a sharp tone. "You need to be more realistic, Leo. We don't have money to throw away on things like that." My stomach sank. But just a week later, I watched from my window as he bundled Noah and Sophie into the car for a trip to an amusement park, their excited laughter floating back as if I didn't even exist. A question began to take root in my mind. A cold and persistent whisper. Am I really one of them? The final shattering answer came on an evening when I was 9 years old. Noah, who was then a mischievous 3-year-old, accidentally knocked over Clara's favorite crystal vase. I had seen him toddling towards it and rushed to stop him, but I was too late. Just as the vase hit the floor and exploded into 1,000 pieces, Clara walked in. Her eyes went from the glittering shards on the rug directly to me. "Leo, what did you do to your brother?" she screamed, her face contorted with a rage I had never seen before. I tried to get the words out to explain what had really happened, but she sliced through my attempt. "You're just adopted, Leo," she spat, the words hitting me with the force of a physical blow. "Don't you ever think you have the right to discipline them?" The air left my lungs. I was frozen to the spot, tears stinging my eyes, but I refused to let her see them fall. I clenched my jaw so hard it ached, turned and ran to my room, slamming the door and twisting the lock. That night I cried silently into my pillow, a profound and bottomless loneliness washing over me for the very first time. The truth was finally clear. I wasn't their son. I was just the adopted one. From that night on, a part of me shut down. I retreated into myself, becoming quiet and watchful. I spoke less. The smiles I once gave so freely vanished, and I started making excuses to avoid the forced cheerfulness of family dinners. My only real refuge became the school library, where I could lose myself in the worn pages of old books, escaping to imaginary worlds where no one ever used the word adopted like a weapon. Yet despite the constant ache in my chest, a small, stubborn part of me still felt a flicker of gratitude. They had, after all, given me a roof over my head, food on the table, and clothes on my back. I made a promise to myself in the quiet of my room. One day I would become so successful that they couldn't ignore me. I would repay every penny they'd spent, and then maybe, just maybe, they would finally look at me and see a son. The remainder of my childhood was a lonely battle to preserve what little self-respect I had left. I poured all my energy into my studies, consistently earning top marks, but my achievements were met with deafening silence at home. Meanwhile, Noah and Sophie only had to produce a messy crayon drawing to be smothered in hugs and have their masterpiece proudly displayed on the refrigerator. I'll never forget the day I won first place in the district science fair. I walked home clutching the heavy gold trophy, my heart pounding with a desperate hope. When I showed it to Clara, she barely glanced up from the television. "That's nice, Leo," she said flatly. Now go do your homework." My hope withered. Just a few days later, Sophie came home clutching a cheap plastic prize she'd won at a carnival game, and Clara swept her into a huge hug, beaming. "My little girl is so talented." I stood there in the hallway, the cold metal of my trophy in my hands, feeling completely and utterly invisible. A corrosive doubt began to eat at me. Had I done something to deserve this? Was I simply not good enough? Was it because I wasn't their biological child that their love came with conditions and limits? Or was there some other darker reason I couldn't understand? I had no answers. I just let the confusion and loneliness chew away at my soul. By the time I turned 18, I had arrived at a devastating conclusion. It wasn't about me being wrong. It was that they had made a choice, and that choice was not to love me. That realization was agonizing, but it also lit a defiant flame inside me. I made a new vow. Even if they never saw me as their son, I would build a good life for myself. I would succeed, not to win their approval anymore, but to prove my own worth to myself. The day I finally packed my bags and walked out of that house in San Antonio, I didn't shed a single tear. I just kept repeating a mantra in my head. "Leo, this is it. This is your chance. Don't you dare look back." And so I left, carrying the deep scars of my childhood, but also nurturing a fragile spark of hope that somewhere out there I would find a place where I truly belonged. I had been accepted to the University of Colorado Boulder with a partial scholarship, a godsend that covered my tuition but left nothing for living expenses. My adoptive parents offered me nothing, not a single dollar to help me get started. On the morning I left, David just gave me a curt nod and said, "Good luck," while Clara was already in the kitchen, completely absorbed in making a special breakfast for Noah and Sophie. I paused at the front gate, looking back at them one last time, my chest tight with a foolish, lingering hope for a hug, or even just a word of encouragement. But nothing came. It was as if my 18 years in that house had left no trace at all. I turned my back on them for good, dragged my beat-up suitcase to the bus station, and boarded a coach to Boulder, ready to start my life from zero. Boulder in 2010 was a city humming with energy and possibility, but it was also a tough place for a kid with empty pockets. I found a tiny, grim room for rent in an old building on the far side of town where the plaster was cracked and a permanent scent of damp mildew hung in the air. My entire setup consisted of a second-hand mattress on the floor and a sturdy wooden crate I'd salvaged from an alley to use as a desk. I couldn't afford any of the required textbooks, so I spent my free hours in the campus library or relied on the kindness of upperclassmen who passed down their old, marked-up copies. But I never once complained. This was my life now, and I was determined to make it work. I knew I didn't have the right to. If I was going to rewrite my own story, I had to work twice, maybe 3 times as hard as everyone else around me. To survive, I grabbed any job that would have me. My days were a blur of lectures and labs. At night and on weekends, I was a server at a bustling cafe near the university. My shifts often dragged on past midnight, leaving my feet throbbing and the smell of roasted coffee permanently infused in my hair. There were nights when exhausted, irritable customers would raise their voices at me for a simple mix-up, a latte instead of a cappuccino. I learned to just bow my head, murmur an apology, and keep moving because every single dollar in tips meant I could eat the next day. On top of that, I delivered pizzas every weekend. I can still feel the burn in my legs as I pedaled my rickety bike through the blistering Colorado summer heat, sweat plastering my shirt to my back. I'd pull up to beautiful, well-maintained houses and see kids laughing and chasing each other in lush green yards. In those moments, a pang of longing would hit me, and I couldn't help but think of Noah and Sophie, of the life I had once so desperately wanted. But I learned to shove those thoughts down as quickly as they appeared. The The past was a closed book, something I couldn't change. The future, however, was still mine to write. College itself was a relentless grind. I was majoring in software engineering, a demanding field that required intense focus and creative problem-solving, but I was almost always running on fumes. I spent countless nights staring at the glowing screen of an old, borrowed laptop, my eyes burning from exhaustion as I tried to debug lines of code. I remember one time working on a major group project. I actually fell asleep and slumped over my keyboard, only waking up when my project partner Mark gently shook my shoulder. "Leo, you okay, man?" he asked, his face etched with concern. "You look like you're about to collapse." I forced a weak smile and waved it off. "I'm fine," I lied. "Just a little tired." But the truth was, I wasn't fine at all. I was fraying at the edges. I was in a constant battle, fighting on 3 fronts. To keep from being crushed by debt, by hunger, and by a loneliness so profound it felt like a physical weight. The student loans were the heaviest burden. Even with the scholarship, I had to borrow more and more just to cover my rent and basic groceries. Every month was a tightrope walk of scrimping and saving, my diet often reduced to instant ramen and peanut butter sandwiches for days on end. I vividly remember one evening staring into my wallet at the 3 single-dollar bills inside, with the electricity bill due in 2 days. I sat there in my dark, cramped room, a wave of despair washing over me, wondering if I had made a terrible mistake. But then, the memory of my childhood would rush back, the sting of those words, "You're just adopted," as sharp as ever. No, I couldn't give up. If I failed now, if I let myself fall, it would be like admitting they were right all along, that I really was worthless. I angrily wiped the tears from my face, pushed myself to my feet, and got back to work. Through all of this, I never once reached out to my adoptive parents for help. I had their phone number tucked away, but I never dialed it. A part of me knew with a certainty that ached that they wouldn't care. But another, prouder part of me was determined to make it on my own 2 feet. I swore to myself that even if the entire world turned its back on me, I would build a good life. Not to make them regret their choice, but so that I would never have to regret my own. Still, there were nights, long and suffocating, when I'd lie awake on that lumpy mattress and my mind would drift back to them against my will. I'd wonder how Noah and Sophie were doing, whether my name ever came up in conversation. Did they ever think of me? Once I pulled out the one old photograph I'd kept, a family picture taken when I was 5. I'm standing between Clara and David, beaming a huge, innocent smile. Looking at that happy little boy felt like twisting a knife in my own heart, but I refused to cry. I carefully folded the picture, slid it into the back of a drawer, and whispered to the empty room, "Leo, you don't need them anymore." Slowly, like the first hints of dawn after a long night, I started to find glimmers of light in the darkness. I made a few real friends at the university, people who knew nothing about my past but accepted me for who I was. There was this one guy, Miguel, a relentlessly cheerful guy from El Paso, who would frequently take one look at my sad lunch of plain bread and insist on sharing his. "Dude, you're skinny as a rail, Leo. Eat this," he'd say, pushing a warm, fragrant taco into my hand and refusing to take no for an answer. It was small moments like that, simple acts of kindness, that started to chip away at the wall of loneliness I'd built around myself. I also discovered a true passion for software engineering. There was a satisfying logic to it, a sense of order and control that was missing from the rest of my life. In the binary world of programming, my background didn't matter. No one cared if I was adopted or an orphan. If my code was elegant and functional, I had value. That was it. I started throwing myself into group projects and entering coding competitions, and slowly, I began to get noticed by my professors. One semester, Miguel and I teamed up to work on a project focused on optimizing energy consumption in smart buildings, a pretty new concept back then. Our project ended up winning second place in a statewide collegiate competition, and for the first time in my life, I felt a powerful surge of confidence. I felt like I could actually achieve something great, but life never stays bright for long. During my junior year, I got an unexpected call from an old high school friend back in San Antonio. "Leo, hey, I just saw Noah and Sophie at the mall with your parents," he said, his voice full of innocent cheer. "They all looked so happy. You should give them a call, man. It's been ages." The words landed like a punch to the gut, knocking the air from my lungs. I managed to force a smile into my voice, thanked him for the update, and quickly ended the call. Then I just sat there, my phone still in my hand, feeling the world tilt on its axis. They were still out there living their happy life as if I had been nothing more than a temporary house guest. A bitter question surfaced. Had they ever, even for a second, thought of me? But I violently shook my head, pushing the thought away. I stood up, walked back to my desk, and forced myself to focus on the lines of code glowing on the screen. I couldn't let the past pull me under. Not now, not ever. Graduation day was a huge personal milestone, a moment of immense pride, but it also slammed me headfirst into a harsh reality. I had graduated with honors, my diploma a testament to 4 years of relentless work. But the country was in an economic slump and the job market was brutal. I sent out hundreds of applications targeting everything from small local firms to massive tech corporations, but my inbox filled with nothing but polite, generic rejections. All the while, my mountain of student debt grew even more intimidating, forcing me to move into an even cheaper, more depressing apartment where the neighbors' furious arguments bled through the paper-thin walls every single night. I kept my service jobs, waiting tables and delivering food, but the meager income was barely enough to keep the debt collectors at bay, let alone build any kind of future. There was one night I'll never forget. I was delivering a pizza in a torrential downpour when my foot slipped on the slick pavement and I went down hard, the pizza box flying from my hands. My boss docked my pay for the ruined order and the customer screamed at me on his doorstep. I just stood there in the pouring rain, soaked to the bone, staring at the soggy, cheese-smeared mess on the sidewalk. A wave of hopelessness washed over me. Is any of this even worth it? I wondered, my whole body aching. But then I felt it again, that stubborn, defiant fire that had been burning inside me since the day I left home. I picked myself up, walked back to my miserable little room and kept going. My chance finally arrived on a random afternoon when I stumbled upon an article about the booming green technology sector in Denver. Startups focused on renewable energy and using AI for environmental solutions were attracting major investment. My mind immediately flashed back to that energy optimization project Miguel and I had built in college. And in that moment, a powerful idea sparked to life. It was a massive gamble, but I knew I had to take it. I decided to dive in head first, fully aware that the path ahead was riddled with risk. Using the tiny amount of money I'd managed to save and with Miguel's enthusiastic support, I started to build my own company from scratch. We worked day and night in my cramped, dingy room, turning it into our makeshift headquarters. Our shared desk was a long wooden plank balanced on 2 empty beer crates. My old laptop from college, already on its last legs, would frequently freeze and crash when I tried to run the complex algorithms we were developing. Miguel managed to scrounge up an ancient desktop computer, but it wasn't much of an improvement. We fueled ourselves with instant ramen and cheap bitter coffee, pushing our bodies to the absolute limit. There were many nights when I would simply pass out at our makeshift desk, only to wake up when the morning sun streamed through the grimy, cracked window. Our core concept was to create an AI-driven software platform that could intelligently optimize energy usage for large commercial buildings. But transforming that idea into a functional product required capital, something we had none of. Miguel and I decided our best shot was to enter a major startup competition being held in Denver. Founders from all over the region would be there pitching their ideas to a room full of venture capitalists. The grand prize was $50,000, enough to buy some decent equipment and maybe even rent a tiny, legitimate office space. We gave ourselves 2 months to prepare, and it was the most intense period of my life. We worked grueling 18-hour days, obsessively refining our prototype and memorizing our pitch until we could recite it in our sleep. I coded until my fingers were numb and my vision blurred, while Miguel focused on creating a sleek user interface and compiling exhaustive market research. The night before the competition, I caught a glimpse of myself in the bathroom mirror. I saw a gaunt, exhausted man with deep, dark circles under his eyes, but I also saw a fierce, unwavering determination burning in them. "You can do this, Leo," I told my reflection. "You have to do this." The next day, I found myself standing on a brightly lit stage in a packed auditorium, staring out at a sea of faces, dozens of sharp-suited investors and the other hungry, ambitious teams we were up against. My heart was hammering against my ribs. This was it. My hands were trembling as I gripped the microphone, but I took a deep, steadying breath and began to speak. I laid out our vision, explaining how our software could save commercial properties millions of dollars while simultaneously cutting carbon emissions by the ton. And then, I shared my own story. I told them about being an orphan, about the hardships I'd faced, and about the relentless drive that had brought me to this stage. I had no idea if my personal history would connect with them, but when I finished my last sentence, the entire room erupted in applause. Across the stage, Miguel and I locked eyes, our hearts pounding in unison. We ended up taking second place, which came with a prize of $25,000. It wasn't the fortune we dreamed of, but it was more than enough to feel like we were finally on the right track. It was a start. With that seed money, we were able to rent a small corner in a shared co-working space in downtown Denver. Our new office was nothing more than a simple wooden table, a couple of mismatched chairs, and a whiteboard covered in our frantic, sprawling notes. But to me, it was the most beautiful place in the world. I finally felt like I had a place where I belonged, a tangible goal to pour all my energy into. We officially incorporated our company, calling it Nexus Energy Systems. The name was Miguel's idea, something about the nexus of technology and environmental responsibility. I've never been good with names, so I just laughed and went with it. Then, in 2018, our real break came. We received an invitation to a major green tech conference in San Francisco, a huge event that attracted the most promising startups and the biggest investors in the industry. Miguel and I could barely scrape together the money for plane tickets and a cheap motel room, but we gritted our teeth and drained our accounts, knowing this might be our one and only shot at the big leagues. At the conference, we managed to secure a pitch meeting with a group of partners from a prestigious venture capital firm called Terra Capital. They were immediately impressed, especially with how our software used predictive AI to anticipate and adjust a building's energy needs in real time. After our presentation, a poised, middle-aged woman with striking silver hair named Elizabeth Croft, the firm's managing director, invited us to dinner to continue the conversation. That meal was a turning point. It was the first time in my life I felt like someone was truly listening to me. Elizabeth wasn't just interested in our profit margins, she asked about my personal story. I found myself telling her everything, not to gain her sympathy, but because I needed her to understand that this wasn't just about money for me. I wanted to build something with real meaning, something that could genuinely make the world a little bit better. Elizabeth listened intently, her eyes filled with an empathy that felt completely genuine. As the dinner drew to a close, she looked directly at me and said, "Leo, I believe in you. Not just because you have a brilliant product, but because I can see that you are someone who will never, ever give up." A week later, Terra Capital officially offered to invest $1 million in Nexus Energy Systems in exchange for a 20% stake in the company. That investment changed our entire world. We moved into a proper office, hired a team of 3 talented engineers and a dedicated marketing specialist. I threw myself into learning how to actually run a company. Everything from managing finances and payroll to building a cohesive and motivated team. In 2020, Nexus Energy Systems officially launched our first product. Our first major client was a regional hotel chain based in Denver. Within 3 months, our software had cut their energy costs by a staggering 30%. Word of our success began to spread like wildfire, and soon more contracts were rolling in. We signed on office buildings, large shopping malls, and even a university in California. Our revenue skyrocketed, and just 2 years after that initial investment, the company was valued at $10 million. I, the kid who had once delivered pizzas in the pouring rain just to survive, was now the CEO of a respected and rapidly growing green tech startup. Forbes even included me in a feature on notable entrepreneurs under 35. Reading my name in that magazine, I couldn't help but let out a dry, ironic laugh. They couldn't possibly know what it had taken for me to get there. My newfound success brought with it a life I had never even allowed myself to dream about. I finally moved out of that moldy, depressing room and into a small but bright apartment in a nice downtown Denver neighborhood. I bought a reliable used car, officially retiring my delivery bike and the memories of pedaling through the sweltering summer heat. One of the first things I did was send a large sum of money to Miguel, enough for him to buy his mother a beautiful new house back in El Paso. It was my way of thanking him for sticking with me through the absolute worst of it. But even with financial security, I never forgot where I came from. I still ate instant ramen on nights when I was too busy to cook. I still wore my favorite old t-shirts to the office, and I still kept that one faded family photograph tucked away in my desk drawer. I didn't keep it because I missed them, but as a constant, tangible reminder of just how far I had come. Even though my life had been completely transformed on the outside, there was still a quiet, hollow space deep inside me. I hadn't had any contact with my adoptive parents, David and Clara Miller, since the day I left San Antonio 11 years earlier. In quiet moments, I would sometimes find myself wondering how they were. Despite the deep and lasting heartbreak they had caused me, I couldn't completely erase the gratitude I felt. They may not have loved me like their own son, but I couldn't deny the fact that they had taken me in, giving me a home when I was just a lost little boy in an orphanage. I had always told myself that one day I would repay them. Not to beg for their affection, but to prove to them and to myself that I had made something of my life, that I hadn't let the past destroy me. An idea for a grand gesture began to form in my mind. I wanted to do something so significant that it would force them to see me in a new light. Then it came to me. A beautiful beachfront villa. It would be the perfect gift for David's upcoming 65th birthday, a major milestone that deserved a spectacular celebration. In 2023, during a second round of funding, I sold a small portion of my company shares, which provided me with a substantial personal windfall. With that money, I began to quietly search for the perfect property. I finally found it. A stunning modern villa in a quiet coastal town just a few hours' drive from Denver. It was perched right on the edge of a cliff with huge glass walls that offered an unobstructed view of the ocean. It had a lush, sprawling garden and a wide, covered porch where you could sit and listen to the constant, soothing crash of the waves. The villa cost $4 million, a staggering sum, but to me, it felt worth every penny. I could picture David sitting on that porch in the morning, sipping his coffee and gazing out at the endless expanse of water. I imagined Clara planting flowers in the garden just like she used to do in our old yard in San Antonio. And maybe, just maybe, they would finally invite me to stay for dinner. And they would look at me with the pride and affection of a true son. This gift, I hoped, would be a bridge across the vast, silent chasm of the last 11 years. I hired a lawyer to handle all the complex paperwork. The official gift deed, legally transferring ownership of the property to David Miller, was drawn up, signed, and notarized. I kept the entire plan a closely guarded secret, not telling a soul, not even Miguel. I wanted it to be a complete surprise. A single powerful moment that had the potential to change everything between us. I began counting down the days to David's birthday on January 4th. I knew, of course, that I wouldn't be invited to whatever party they were planning. But I decided I would show up anyway, with the deed in hand and a sincere wish for his happiness. I wasn't expecting hugs or tearful apologies. I just hoped that this gesture would finally make them see that I had become someone they could be proud of. In the days leading up to his birthday, my mind was a constant swirl of memories, replaying scenes from the past over and over again. Some nights, I would pull that old family photograph from my desk drawer and just stare at the face of the 5-year-old boy beaming with unadulterated joy between his parents. I wondered if they ever remembered those early days, the times they held me close and sang me to sleep. I had no way of knowing the answer, but I chose to believe that somewhere deep down, buried under years of neglect, a flicker of that original affection must still exist. This gift, I told myself, this grand gesture would be the thing to reawaken it. David's 65th birthday finally arrived. I made the drive from Denver, my heart pounding in my chest with the nervous excitement of a little kid waiting for Christmas morning. The gift deed, nestled inside a crisp white envelope, sat on the passenger seat beside me. I had put on a simple but well-tailored suit, feeling a sudden, intense need to look my best for the first time in years. During the drive, I practiced my greeting over and over in my head. "Happy birthday, Dad. I have a special gift for you." I pictured David's look of stunned surprise, Clara's slow, uncertain smile, and maybe, just maybe, a glimmer of pride in their eyes as they finally saw me as their son, no longer just the forgotten adopted kid. The 3-hour drive from Denver to San Antonio gave me far too much time to think. My mind drifted back to my childhood in that house, to the smell of Clara's buttery cookies on Sunday mornings, to the feeling of flying as David pushed me on the swing, his laughter echoing in the yard. "You're going to soar like an eagle, Leo." But then, like a film reel snapping, the memory would jump to the day Noah and Sophie were born, the day everything crumbled. I became a ghost in my own home, pushed to the margins of my own family. Clara's words from when I was 9, "You're just adopted," still echoed in my memory, as sharp and painful as the day she'd said them. And yet somehow a part of me remained grateful. They had, after all, taken in an orphan, and I was determined to repay that act with this gift, hoping it could finally erase the years of painful distance. I pulled up to the old house in San Antonio in the late afternoon. The white picket fence was still there, a fresh coat of paint gleaming in the sun. Clara's daisy garden was as immaculate as ever. The sounds of music and laughter spilled out from the backyard, where the party was clearly in full swing. I took a deep, shaky breath, my hand tightening around the envelope, and walked through the gate. My heart was racing, a familiar cocktail of hope and fear churning in my stomach. I wasn't invited. No one was expecting me, but I pushed the thought away. "You've come this far, Leo," I told myself. "Don't stop now." The backyard was crowded with people. There must have been over 50 guests, a mix of friends, relatives, and my adoptive parents' colleagues, all gathered around tables draped in white linen. A small jazz trio was playing cheerful music near the patio, and the smoky aroma of barbecue hung heavy in the air. I hovered at the edge of the crowd, trying to blend in, but the moment I took a step forward, I felt eyes on me. Noah and Sophie, now 27 years old, spotted me almost immediately. They were standing near the food table. Noah, tall and blonde, was wearing an expensive-looking shirt that was probably worth more than my first car. A condescending smirk spread across his face when he saw me. Sophie, her long hair pulled back in a high ponytail, was wearing a bright red dress. She giggled behind her hand, her eyes sparkling with the same familiar mischief I remembered from our childhood. "Well, look who decided to show up," Noah called out loudly, his voice dripping with a theatrical sarcasm that immediately drew the attention of everyone nearby. "Leo, long time no see. I'm surprised you still remember the way back here," Sophie chimed in, her voice shrill and mocking. "Oh my God, he's wearing a suit. Don't tell me you're here to beg Dad for a job at the bank." They both burst into loud, cruel laughter, as if my very presence was the punchline to a private joke. My face flushed hot with humiliation, but I forced myself to stand straighter, my knuckles white as I gripped the envelope. "I'm here to wish Dad a happy birthday," I said, struggling to keep my voice even. "And I have a special gift for him." Noah raised a skeptical eyebrow and took a step closer, the red wine in his glass sloshing dangerously close to the rim. "A special gift? Really?" he drawled, his eyes raking over me with disdain. "Let me guess, a cheap tie, or maybe one of your little drawings?" Sophie, leaning against his shoulder, added with a sly grin, "Oh, but wait, Leo, you're not the only one with a surprise. Dad has a special gift for you today, too. I bet you're going to cry when you find out what it is." They exchanged a conspiratorial look, giggling like they were sharing a delicious secret I wasn't allowed to know. "What gift?" I asked, my voice tight with a growing sense of unease. A cold dread started to creep up my spine. Noah just shrugged, his smile smug and infuriating. "You'll see. Dad's going to announce it in a little while. Trust me, you'll want to hear it before you do anything." Stupid. Their words gave me pause. A gift from David? For me? After 11 years of complete and utter silence, was it possible he was trying to make amends? I told myself not to get my hopes up, but a small, foolish part of me, the little boy who had once yearned for their love, desperately wanted to believe it. "Fine. I'll wait," I said, my voice low but firm. Noah and Sophie erupted in another round of loud, obnoxious laughter, as if my response was the funniest thing they had ever heard. "Good call, Leo. Don't go anywhere," Sophie chirped, before pulling Noah back toward their group of friends, leaving me standing alone and exposed in the sea of strangers. I scanned the crowd, my eyes searching for my adoptive parents. I finally spotted them near the main table. David was wearing a tailored gray suit and Clara was in an elegant floral dress. As I started to walk toward them, they looked up and saw me. The reaction was instantaneous. I saw pure shock flash across their faces. David froze completely, his wine glass stopping halfway to his lips. "Leo," he managed to say, his voice strained and shocked as if he were seeing a ghost. Clara brought a hand to her mouth, her eyes wide with what looked like a flicker of pure panic. What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly, making it clear my presence was an unwelcome disruption. I forced a smile, though my heart felt like it was being squeezed in a vice. "I'm here to wish Dad a happy birthday," I said, holding up the white envelope. "And I brought him a special gift." David's eyes flickered from the envelope to my face and back again, his expression a confusing mix of surprise and discomfort. Clara simply turned away, pointedly avoiding my gaze, her hands clasped so tightly in front of her that her knuckles were white. "Thank you, Leo. We'll talk later, okay?" David said, his voice flat and dismissive, before immediately turning back to resume his conversation with the man standing next to him. I was left standing there, feeling more like an intruder than ever, but I didn't leave. I was determined to give them the gift, to show them the man I had become. And besides, I needed to know what this special gift Noah and Sophie had been gloating about was. The party continued around me, but I was completely isolated. No one offered me a seat. No one spoke to me or asked how I'd been. I stood by the fence, watching everyone eat and laugh and socialize, feeling like an invisible man. Noah and Sophie would occasionally glance in my direction, whispering to each other and giggling. I tried to ignore them, but every smug look felt like a fresh cut. I told myself to just be patient, that the moment I handed over the deed, everything would change. I pictured David opening the envelope, his eyes scanning the legal document, the realization of what I had done finally dawning on him. But a small, cynical voice in the back of my mind kept whispering, "Leo, you're hoping for way too much." And then the moment of truth arrived. David stepped up onto a small, makeshift stage in the center of the yard, tapping his wine glass with a spoon to get everyone's attention. The crowd quieted down, all eyes turning toward him. "Thank you all so much for being here today," he began, his voice warm and resonant as it carried across the lawn. "Today isn't just about celebrating my 65th birthday. It's also an opportunity for me to share a very important family decision with all of you." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded legal document, holding it up for everyone to see. "This," he announced, "is my will, and I want everyone here to know that upon my passing, all of my assets, this house, my bank accounts, everything, will be divided equally between Noah and Sophie, my beloved children." But he didn't stop there. His tone suddenly sharpened, his words taking on a cruel, pointed edge as his eyes found me in the crowd. "By the way, I see that my adopted son Leo has decided to join us today after more than a decade of silence. He claims he has a birthday gift for me. But I suspect he's really just here to try and curry some last-minute favor. Too bad for him, he's a little too late. My will is already finalized." Then, looking directly at me with a cold, dismissive expression, he added, "Sorry about that, Leo. Since you're only adopted, I guess I just forgot to include your name." The yard erupted in a wave of laughter and applause. Noah and Sophie threw their arms around each other, their faces beaming with smug triumph. I stood rooted to the spot, the world tilting under my feet, a roaring sound filling my ears. So this was the special gift they had been talking about. A public reading of a will designed to formally and completely erase me from the family, executed in front of dozens of witnesses. I looked over at Noah, who met my gaze with a malicious, triumphant grin. "Told you Dad had a gift for you," Sophie chirped, her voice piercing through the noise. "I said he was going to cry. Look at his face." They both howled with laughter, as if my profound and public humiliation was the most entertaining show they had ever seen. A few of the other guests shot me furtive glances, their eyes filled with a mixture of morbid curiosity and fleeting pity. But no one said a word. I looked at David, a desperate, foolish hope flickering inside me that this was all just some kind of cruel, elaborate joke, a tasteless attempt to liven up the party, but no. He stepped down from the platform and casually resumed his conversations, as if nothing out of the ordinary had just happened, as if I didn't even exist. Clara just stood there beside him, silent and still, her hands clasped, her face a complete blank. In that moment, my heart didn't just break, it shattered into a million pieces. All the years of back-breaking work, all those sleepless nights, all my fragile, secret hopes for a family, All of it was incinerated in a single public act of cruelty. I was suddenly that 9-year-old boy again, standing frozen in the kitchen, hearing Clara's voice snap, "You're just adopted." And now, 25 years later, those same words were being echoed by my adoptive father. Tears burned the back of my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I would not give Noah and Sophie the satisfaction of seeing me break. I would not let my adoptive parents think for 1 second that they had won. My fingers trembling, I clutched the envelope and took a step forward, planting myself in the middle of the yard, directly in front of David. The chatter died down as the crowd fell silent again, all eyes now on me. "I came here today to repay you, not to beg for anything," I said, my voice shaking with emotion but ringing with a clarity that cut through the sudden stillness. I held up the notarized deed for everyone to see. "This is the deed to a $4 million beachfront villa. I bought it for you. I was going to give it to you both tonight to thank you for taking me in and raising me." A wave of murmurs and gasps rippled through the crowd. David froze, his eyes widening in disbelief, his hands starting to tremble. Clara covered her mouth, the color draining from her face as if she was just now realizing the magnitude of what they had done. Noah and Sophie stood a few feet away, their triumphant smiles completely gone, replaced by looks of utter shock. I continued, my voice gaining strength and conviction with every word. "I have worked my entire life, not to prove anything to any of you, but to prove my own worth to myself. I thought this gift," I said, gesturing to the torn paper, "could finally bridge the gap between us. I thought it might make you finally see me as a son. But I see now that it was never necessary." I locked eyes with David one last time, and then slowly and deliberately I tore the gift deed in half, and then in half again, letting the pieces flutter to the grass like fragments of my own broken heart. The entire yard seemed to hold its breath. Noah and Sophie just gaped at me, completely speechless. David took an involuntary step forward, his mouth opening and closing, but no words came out. I turned my back on all of them and walked out of the yard without a second glance. Behind me, the jazz trio hesitantly started playing again, but the celebratory mood had been shattered. I could hear the whispers starting up as I walked away. "That's Leo, the adopted son. How could they treat him like that?" But I didn't care anymore. I walked through the gate, got into my car, and started the long drive back to Denver, leaving that house and the last vestiges of my hope for a family behind me for good. On the drive home, I didn't cry. Instead, I felt a strange and profound sense of relief, as if I had finally shrugged off a heavy burden that I had been carrying on my shoulders for decades. In the days that followed, I threw myself back into my routine. Nexus Energy Systems, my company, was thriving. We had just landed a major contract with a chain of shopping centers in California, and my team, which had now grown to over 60 people, was working tirelessly to refine and improve our energy optimization software. I went to meetings. I joked with my employees, and I gave interviews to the media with all the polished confidence of a successful CEO. But every night when I returned to my quiet apartment, the silence was deafening. The old family photograph was no longer in my desk drawer. I had finally thrown it away. I had tossed it in the trash the night I got back from the party, but the memories of them still lingered like ghosts. I kept replaying that night in my head, questioning whether I had done the right thing by tearing up the deed and walking away. Was there another, less painful way to end that chapter of my story? One that didn't leave me with a fresh, gaping wound? I eventually came to a realization. I needed to heal. Not for them, not to forgive David and Clara or Noah and Sophie, but to forgive myself. To forgive the young, desperate boy who believed that if he just tried a little harder, he could earn their love. I found a therapist, a kind, middle-aged woman named Dr. Evans. During our first session, I sat stiffly in a leather armchair, my hands clenched in my lap, completely unsure of where or how to begin. "Just start with whatever comes to mind, Leo," she said, her smile gentle and encouraging. And so I did. The words started to pour out of me. I told her about my childhood, about being abandoned, about the years of scraping by on my own, and finally, about the disastrous birthday party that had shattered what little hope I had left. I unleashed emotions that had been bottled up inside me for years, a torrent of pain and anger and grief. Some sessions I would just cry. Others I would find myself consumed with rage, punching the cushions on the couch. But with each appointment, I felt a little bit of the weight lift from my shoulders. Dr. Evans helped me understand that the wounds of my childhood wouldn't just disappear because I had achieved professional success or financial stability. "You've built a life to be incredibly proud of, Leo," she told me during one session. "But now you need to give yourself permission to actually feel the pain instead of just burying it under more work." On her recommendation, I started journaling, something I had never considered before. Every night I would sit at my desk and write down my thoughts, my memories, and my dreams for a future that was no longer shackled to the past. I wrote about David pushing me on the swing, about Clara's voice cutting through me when she said I was just adopted, and about the visceral, liberating feeling of tearing that deed to pieces in front of everyone. Writing it all down helped me to see things with a new clarity. Not to assign blame, but to finally accept that I couldn't change them. I could only change how I chose to face myself and my own history. A full year passed after that fateful birthday party. I had no contact with my adoptive parents, nor did I hear a single word from Noah or Sophie. They had finally become what they should have been all along, a closed chapter in the book of my past. But life, as it turns out, has a funny way of surprising you when you least expect it. On a cool day in March, I was invited to be the keynote speaker at a major sustainable energy conference in Houston. Nexus Energy Systems had become a recognized leader in the green tech industry, and my speech was meant to inspire the next generation of young entrepreneurs. Standing on that stage in front of more than 500 people, I shared my journey, from an abandoned orphan to the CEO of a multi-million-dollar company. I didn't mention my adoptive parents by name, but I spoke honestly about the wounds that had shaped me and how I had learned to transform that pain into an unstoppable drive. When I finished, the entire auditorium rose to their feet in a standing ovation. I smiled, a genuine, unburdened smile, feeling for the first time like I had truly come a long way. Later, at the reception, I was mingling with the crowd, shaking hands with investors and chatting with eager university students. Suddenly, an elderly woman with elegant silver hair, pulled into a high bun and wearing a tasteful green sweater, approached me. Her eyes were kind, but they were also tinged with a deep, unmistakable emotion. "Leo," she said, her voice soft and warm. I searched my memory, trying to place her familiar face, and then it hit me. She was my Aunt Helen, Clara's older sister, a woman I had only met a handful of times when I was a very young child. "Aunt Helen?" I said, the name feeling strange on my tongue after so many years. She nodded, a sad smile playing on her lips, her eyes red-rimmed as if she had been crying. "I heard your speech, dear," she said. "It was beautiful. I am so proud of you, Leo. But I need to tell you what happened on the night of David's birthday after you left." We found a quiet corner in the busy reception hall, and Helen took my hand in hers as if trying to lend me some of her own strength. She told me that after I tore up the deed and walked away, a heavy, uncomfortable silence had fallen over the party. "Everyone was in a state of shock, Leo," she said, her grip tightening on my hand. "No one could believe what you had achieved. A $4 million villa meant as a gift for David and Clara. But what stunned them even more was the way you left, not crying, not begging, just with your head held high. She said that some of the guests had started whispering amongst themselves, openly criticizing my adoptive parents for their blatant cruelty. An old friend of David's, a man named Richard, had apparently walked right up to him and said bluntly, "David, you have lost an incredible son tonight." Noah and Sophie, Helen told me, had initially tried to act nonchalant. They had laughed it off, telling anyone who would listen that I was just showing off, trying to make a scene. But as more and more relatives started making their excuses and leaving early, clearly unwilling to be a part of the charade any longer, the siblings had fallen silent. Sophie actually looked guilty, Helen said. She went and sat by herself in a corner and didn't say another word for the rest of the night. Noah tried to keep up his confident act, but he just started drinking heavily like he was trying to drown a bad memory. David, my adoptive father, didn't speak another word for the rest of the party. He just sat at the main table, his gaze fixed on the scattered scraps of paper on the grass, his eyes completely vacant. Helen said that as she was leaving, she saw him bend down and carefully pick up each and every piece of the torn deed before slipping them into his pocket. Listening to Helen's story, a complex wave of emotions washed over me. I didn't know what to feel. Was it pain, anger, or just a profound, hollow emptiness? "Do you think they regret it?" I asked, the words barely a whisper. I asked, my voice hoarse. Helen let out a long, heavy sigh and squeezed my hand again. "I believe they do, Leo, I truly do. But they are both far too proud to ever admit it. Clara never brings you up in our conversations, but I know for a fact that she secretly reads every single article that's ever been published about you and your company. And David, he's aged 10 years since that night. I think he knows deep down that he made a terrible, terrible mistake. He just has no idea how to fix it." I sat there in silence, staring out through the venue's massive floor-to-ceiling windows as the afternoon sun streamed in. I wasn't angry at my adoptive parents anymore, not really. I was just sad. Sad for the different story we could have had if only they had chosen to love me. But I was also incredibly grateful for this unexpected moment of connection. "Thank you, Aunt Helen," I said, managing a small, genuine smile. "I'm okay. I really am." She pulled me into a warm hug, and for the first time in over 2 decades, I felt a flicker of genuine warmth from someone on that side of my family. After the conference, I went back to Denver and continued on with my life. I didn't try to contact my adoptive parents or Noah and Sophie. I didn't need their regret, and I certainly didn't need their apologies. I had finally found my own freedom, not by outrunning my past, but by turning to face it head-on and then finally letting it go. In the months that followed, in addition to continuing my therapy, I found a new sense of purpose in helping others. I started getting involved in charity work, focusing my efforts on supporting orphans and families who were struggling to make ends meet. I even started my own nonprofit foundation, which I named Bright Path, inspired by my own journey. The name felt right, a path leading toward the light, even if it begins in darkness. The foundation provides scholarships for orphans, funds vocational training programs, and builds community centers in underserved neighborhoods. During my first visit to one of our new centers on the east side of Denver, I met a 12-year-old boy named Alex. He was skinny and shy, but his eyes were bright with intelligence, and they absolutely lit up when he started talking about his dream of becoming an engineer. I sat with him for a long time, just listening as he told me about his mother, a single mom who worked as a janitor, and how he was teaching himself to code on an old, slow computer at the public library. I saw so much of myself in Alex, a kid with a fire in his belly, yearning to rise above his difficult circumstances. I immediately awarded him a full scholarship from the foundation and promised to mentor him and follow his journey. When Alex threw his arms around me and whispered, "Thank you, sir," I felt a profound sense of joy that no amount of money could ever buy. My charity work didn't just help others, it was also healing me. Every time I met another child who had been dealt a difficult hand, every time I saw that spark of hope and resilience in their eyes, I was reminded that I wasn't alone. I had finally found my real family, not in that house in San Antonio, but here, in the community of people I was able to help, in my dedicated team at Nexus, and in loyal friends like Miguel who had stood by me through my absolute darkest days. I started to consciously slow down, to savor the small, simple moments in life. A quiet morning jog along the river, the taste of a hot cup of coffee in my office before anyone else arrived, a video call with Miguel and his mother, her face beaming with pride from her new home in El Paso. I was finally learning to love myself, not because of my success or any external recognition, but by simply accepting that I had always done the very best I could with the hand I was dealt. And for me, that was finally enough. I no longer needed or craved my adoptive parents' attention or their validation. That is the story of my life. It is a journey that began with abandonment, that wound its way through years of pain and neglect in a home that was never truly mine, through a lonely struggle for survival, and finally to a place of peace and freedom that I was able to find within myself. My deepest hope in sharing this is that some part of my journey resonates with yours, perhaps offering a spark of encouragement to help you stand with confidence on your own path. More than anything, I want to leave you with the conviction that you possess the courage to face the ghosts of your own past, the strength to carry on through the most profound pain, and the unwavering faith to trust that a light is always waiting at the end of the road, so long as you have the will to keep moving forward.